ja Greg Miles Atosilta, Setting the Foundations for Green Digitalization.
Hello everyone, hopefully you can see me. I'm a bit dark as usual. Hi everyone, thank you for inviting me along. Pleasure to be here. I'm just going to share my screen and let me know when you can see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Wonderful. So thanks, Jari, for inviting us. Delighted to talk to you all today. So I just wanted to probably skim over and cover a few of the points that Jari's already touched on. So I'll do that very lightly, but also talk about our experiences. So I'll talk about Atos and who we are briefly, but then really talk about what we're learning out there in the market with our customers and how we're trying to advance this whole topic effectively. So first of all, so I'm Greg Miles. I'm responsible for decarbonisation within our public sector business. So that's working with clients across multiple geographies, particularly in Northern Europe. So the Nordics and also the UK, working with public sector customers on how we can decarbonise their digital estate, but also beyond and leverage that power of technology. Us as an organisation, so we're a global leader in secure and decarbonised digital. So what does that mean? Well, we're an IT kind of outsource organisation. We're a managed services company. We have healthcare practice within that as well. But we're a global company with 109,000 people in 71 countries, including Finland. And our focus is all around digital solutions and products and consultancy that goes with that. And one of our key focuses, and this has been part of our strategy for the last couple of years now, is to really drive growth in the decarbonisation area with the power of digital technology. So it's an area we're really passionate about. But like everyone, we're learning. We work with partners, and collaboration. I saw in Pia's slide as well, and absolutely endorse that. The collaboration element is so important as we all learn from each other, because nobody has got the right answers. You know, we're all searching and driving progress, and it's really important to recognise that. So in terms of our own emissions, and I just wanted to touch on this because, you know, clearly as a private sector, international organisation, we're aligned with those, you know, leading climate targets, including the 1.5 degree pathway that Pia's just talked about with Nokia. We've also just committed to the latest net zero standard, which has been set by the Science Based Target Institute. So what that means, that's trying to get a defined measurement against net zero. So you'll see out there in the wide world, there's net zero commitments all over, from organizations, from governments, etc. And what this is doing is effectively aligning everyone to the same framework so that there's a single definition and, you know, everyone is working to the same goal. And I'll touch on where that varies in a second. But for us, that means and for everyone actually, that means a 90% emissions reduction from pre-industrial levels by 2050, which is a huge ambition because that covers everything. It's not just your direct emissions, but it's also your supply chain or the use of sold goods, as Pia talked about, impacting Nokia. So it's a huge challenge for us because we're already on the pathway for reducing emissions by 50% from a 2019 baseline by 2025, which again is working with supply chain, with obviously energy consumption and travel, etc. But that 90% reduction is a massive undertaking if you think it's our whole supply chain as well. And for us, Pia talked about the different emission scopes and how the use of sold products is a significant, the predominant proportion of Nokia's emissions, which is a huge challenge. And it's for us, it's a slightly different story because we don't sell. Our impact is from we don't make any products. Our impact is from our supply chain, effectively, even though we have managed data centers globally, in a big kind of electricity footprint. Actually, our carbon footprint sits within our supply chain, and that's because of some of the reasons that Jari touched on a second ago in terms of the makeup of digital tech, and I'll cover that in a second. So this challenge of a 90% reduction is huge, and I'll touch on the opportunities we see in technology, but it's all about really measurement and understanding, and that comes through data and data analysis, and ultimately then making using technology to make the right decisions, as Jari touched on, so that we're going down the right pathways, because ultimately we don't have time to waste to make those mistakes. So in terms of the digital footprint, Jari's done a really good job of covering this. I guess my summary would be that globally, what I'm seeing is that really we don't have a clear idea, and that's because historically it's not been measured. We see now there's a recovery process, and organizations are doing their best to estimate, and as we say, you know, they're going down the supply chain trying to find those emission sources as well. Everybody's learning. We know nothing is absolute, nothing is 100% right. There's a maturity model around all of this, which we need to factor into our calculations. And the big challenge we see in the role for organizations like ourselves, but also the core vendors out there, is really getting a handle on this to understand for sure what is that real impact, how much is it of global emissions. But ultimately it's about, you know, not just standing there and trying to work it out, it's taking the best estimates we can and driving the progress that we need, that Jari's touched on. So I talked a little bit about the emission scopes, and apologies if it's a little bit small, but as I said, for us as an organization, you know, our indirect emissions, our scope 3, is the largest part of our organization, so it's around 75%. It's really important when we look at obviously scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, so the direct emissions for things like company facilities, you know, company vehicles. You know, clearly that's where technology has got a role in terms of moving away from fossil fuels. The scope 2 indirect is really interesting because the consumption of, you know, electricity and heating is, you know, a massive problem globally, and there's a huge focus on, you know, decarbonizing our national energy systems, particularly with renewables obviously coming in. And interestingly, actually, just a little fact that I found on my travels is that for us, for instance, we looked at our data centers, and we've got a huge program driving efficiency, because there's, you know, wastage of electricity is always a big problem. And when we talk about decarbonizing the energy system overall, number one target is take the top 15% of wastage that we have currently, kind of internationally. How do we drive those reductions? And there is definitely a role for digital there. But if we look at even data centers, there's lots of work to, you know, you'll see solar panels and air conditioning improvements using effectively air source kind of pumps and air source air conditioning units. For us, we found that putting solar panels on our data center, and I personally looked at this, is a great opportunity, but it only generates 1% of the data center's electricity. So it just shows that actually to drive full renewables and invest it and drive the additionality, you won't have enough roof space ultimately. So it's you need to then start investing in much broader projects, which, if you're talking about solar, needs a huge amount of land, or obviously significant contribution from wind particularly. But it's also an area where we're looking at hydrogen as a future source, and we've got an active project at the moment to build a proof of concept hydrogen data center, which is going to be very exciting. But ultimately, as I say, the big challenge that we see for our clients and for the industry as a whole, and for everyone actually, because I hear this a lot, is around the scope 3 emissions, and as Piers talked about as well. So it's the upstream and the downstream, and this is where we see a huge role for digital technologies, things like blockchain, things like IoT, to drive the measurement of those emission sources and then pull those data sets together so that we get that clear understanding and analysis to then help us make those right decisions. If I talk about what we've learned so far, and Jari, you've touched on this really nicely as well. You know, we've sort of seen a sort of 4-step process from our side, which is, you know, identifying those emitting components to start with. So, you know, certainly finding those big ticket items that are driving the most significant contribution, and really targeting effort on that. Defining the CO2 data elements against that. So this is all around how can we actually calculate a carbon footprint? What are the data sources that we actually need to determine that? Is it raw materials? Is it energy consumption? You know, there's various elements there. And the key thing I would say is that we particularly see that this isn't just a technology conversation. this is very much a people challenge and a people conversation as well. So the technology is always going to be there to underpin it. But actually, it's all about the people to actually drive and initiate this. So stakeholder management is something that's really important. And actually, in the reporting side of this, that's where it's got a role to play as well. So we certainly see that engaging across a business and an organization, I'm seeing lots of people really interested in the topic, but it's about driving those connections internally and externally from an organization that really starts to make a difference. Step 3, we see the designing a collection mechanism. Now, the biggest challenge that I see at the moment, or one of them for organizations, is we're just spending too much time in the sort of steps 1 and 2. And ultimately, I see this from our own company, and we're trying to tackle this ourselves, but also corporate social responsibility teams and customers. They spend months every year just trying to calculate the footprint of their business, their organization, and then working against the actions to drive those reductions. This is where we've got to speed that process up, because again, it's all about outcomes and driving the right action. It's not about the measurement. Yes, we've got to do the measurement, but we can't spend our life doing that because we'll have missed the targets that we're rapidly running towards. And finally, as I said, the deploying a platform piece is really interesting, because this is where it's all about the power of data analysis, and it's about not only us as decision makers or clients with that responsibility, or individuals internally within an organization, but it's also about using this reporting and data to then drive broader awareness. So you can look at this from a citizen perspective. So if you think about energy, and I know we've touched on smart meters, how do we go 2 steps further in smart meters? So instead of just having it on a device, I've got a full dashboard. I've then got automated feeds into my home utilities, so my washing machine, for instance. How do I connect all these things to drive better visibility to myself to reduce my own energy consumption, but also have that connection with technology that really drives that in an automated way for me? And that's where we see it going, and that's where the acceleration is going to be in the future. And so I just wanted to talk about what we've done to ourselves, because we've, as we said, we haven't got all the answers. We've had to work on this ourselves and understand our own digital footprint. And it's been a real challenge as we went right across the estate and with our vendors and suppliers. And this is where we've got to. So we've basically pulled together all these data sources, done that exercise that I talked about. And we were really surprised, because we took our global IT footprint, and before we did this, we thought, right, it's going to be our data centers. That's where clearly data centers, lots of energy, that's going to be our emission sources. That's where we'll continue to focus our effort. We did this analysis, and hopefully you can see here that actually 46% of our footprint was our PCs, was our laptops and desktops that we have across those 109,000 employees. And Jari, that rings really nicely with the slide you showed earlier, with devices being the big chunk of IT emissions. We absolutely found that ourselves. And so then our first step was, with this new information, was, right, okay, we need to sort our procurement of laptops, reassess, go back to the market and identify the lowest emissions that we can get through the procurement approach. And this is where, I talk about stakeholder management. This is where procurement has got a huge role to play as well. It's not just a technology conversation. It's about people in procurement and commercial sustainability and beyond. And so to sort of talk about solutions then, when we look at these sources and what we've learned from it, is to sort of embed this focus on sustainability in digital services and focus on elevating clients' understanding of footprint by, we've deployed a decarbonisation level agreement. So in our big IT service contracts, we're now committing to reducing carbon footprint, and we do that by measuring it up front and then setting in stone a reduction target that will work with the customer to reduce year on year. And so this is where we'll do things like look at the physical estate, but obviously data transmission, application performance is also a big part of this. And with that commitment, we're effectively driving the customer to get visibility of their own emission sources and work with us to identify the next steps to reduce that footprint. And we do it with that dashboard reporting, because again, you need that visualization and understanding. And just to show you another example of how we do that. So we talked about devices, and apologies, there's quite a few words here. We talked about end user devices being a significant part of, of the IT estate. So clearly circular economy principles are going to be really important in all this hardware that we've got. And it's not just laptops and computers, but if you think about mobile phones and, telecoms devices and all medical equipment and all the electronics we have out there, we've really got to focus on how we get those raw materials and reuse them and really get to a circular environment. So we're working with a partner that's remanufacturing, and it's different from refurbishing. They're remanufacturing to, as new spec, effectively, a 3-year-old laptop that's just come out of its first life cycle use phase. They are packaging that up as effectively a brand new device. So they're replacing components where necessary, doing that full rebuild, offering warranty to customers. But crucially, from a footprint perspective, they're around 380 kilos of CO2 lower than just buying a brand new device. So, and that's through obviously the avoided emissions in landfill ultimately, and elsewhere, and in the resource consumption in building a device. So these types of solutions are really interesting, and it's something that we have to pivot even clients' understanding and thinking around, because we've always bought new across the industry, across the world, and particularly in the developed world, that's the approach. You just buy new because that's the performance and you can trust it. Where we need to get to, and particularly in digital, is actually and physical hardware is all about a new approach that says actually that's not the right thing. And again, this comes with awareness of things like carbon footprint, realizing that you can obtain better performance, or if not equivalent, from these innovative type solutions. And so that is a really interesting element for us. Just to talk about, again, I'm nearly done, but focusing on another customer deployment as well, just to kind of highlight this. We also work with another SME that's taking end of use devices. So it is workplaces again, but we're taking those devices and they're using a scheme with prisoners in a prison in the north of England. And what they're doing is they're training inmates in IT refurbishment. So they're taking devices from our large customer bases, refurbishing those through prison schemes. They are then training and educating those people, but then what they're able to do with those refurbished devices is sell them downstream, or even donate them to schools, which is what happened during COVID in the UK. And particularly we talk about digital, and the digital divide is a really powerful kind of impending problem when we talk about digitizing economies. How do you avoid digital exclusion, particularly in the developing world, is really, really important. So with this organization, we're also tying social value to it. So yes, there's the carbon reduction piece there. There's value off the back of it, avoiding landfill, but there's also a role to play here for generating value that you can put into social projects. And again, Jari, obviously you talked about the sustainable development goals, and so did Pia, and it's about how we incorporate and not just focus on carbon, but also look at these wider social benefits too. And finally, with the other experience we found with this customer, with the Ministry of Justice in the UK, is that we started tracking and recording every change that we delivered for them. So as part of a managed service, we do things like server upgrades, etc. And we started to measure each one of those impacts and report it to the client. And what we found is that with the individual project managers we were reporting that to, that visibility suddenly has changed their perspective and made them think about other projects, what the environmental impact might be. And so it's been really interesting. And again, going back to that point of reporting and visibility, it can be really powerful in driving a change in thinking. And that's what we're seeing. It's about not just here's CO2 and tons of CO2, but also we equate that to trees planted. We're British, so cups of tea made as well. Those type of equivalents can be really interesting to leverage learning. But more broadly, and my final kind of couple of slides, as Jari said, it's really important. Step one is really focus on just the embedded digital footprint that we have. So how do we make the IT footprint that Jari's touched on as efficient as possible? How do we reduce that wastage in terms of energy consumption and materials, and deliver IT services that are as good to the environment as they can be, and not contributing to an increase in emissions? So that's one side of the coin. The other side is all about the possibilities with technology to drive global emissions reductions. So through the simple example I always use is, this meeting and us not traveling to meet each other has had a reduction in footprint enabled through digital technology. Scale that to every industry in every area, there are huge amount of opportunities there, which organizations like ourselves and others, and obviously from a university perspective as well, researchers are really driving to identify where we go. So we know there's a big potential, but to understand what it looks like, again, we're working across every industry and working with customers to understand their challenges. So software, for instance, is an interesting one. We've got a partner that focuses on mobile applications. In the defense space, we found we were, by improving the coding of the software on a soldier's portable device, we gave them 4 hours of additional battery life. And so that's about operational improvement, right, in the functionality of their device, but it's also reduced energy consumption significantly as well. So it's simple elements like that are really interesting from a software perspective. We go as far as data centers as well. Again, hydrogen and how we reduce the impact of data centers is really interesting. Real-time consumption of IT estates is something we're working on as well. So can we identify through agents sat on a laptop or a desktop, what's their runtime? Are certain applications driving energy performance spikes that we previously haven't known about? Does a rollout of Teams have a significant contribution to our carbon footprint? All these types of elements are really important. And so, as I said, it comes back to data collection, analysis against that to be able to make the right decisions. So I'll finish there, but hopefully that was useful, Jari. And again, I'm happy to take questions or any further conversations as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. That was really insightful. I got kind of a feeling when I was listening this thing, and especially those refurbished laptops. You have any figures? What is if the normal lifetime is, let's say, 3 years or 4 years, and then refurbished? What is the kind of the new lifetime of those devices?
So the idea is that they go for another 3 or 4 years,
okay,
and then will get refurbished again, or remanufactured again, and go on and on until they really aren't usable anymore. So the idea we see is going down that value chain. So particularly as a corporate client, might demand the highest spec, for instance, as you go to schools or charities, they might have a lower computing requirement, and you can go down and down the chain. So we see that it's not just a single usage kind of cycle, but actually there's different requirements from different usage types as well.
Yeah, I kind of like it because what I have seen here in Finland is that there is some old machines that are given directly to schools, and because they are refurbished, they are not so usable anymore at that point. So they kind of become old and laggy and so on. And as such, refurbishing those things, I'm just wondering what is the percentage of things you need to refurbish? Okay, the processor, maybe some memory. There was also something about the screen, maybe changing that, but definitely not all.
No, exactly, and it is significant when we add it up. I can share more detail with you, so it'd be great to have a broader conversation, and we can share information.